People of God, someone recently shared their experience of reading through the Psalms for the first time with me, and she remarked on how David complained about his situation quite a bit. But then she added this unique note. She said that even amidst his complaint, the unique thing about reading through David's words was that he always seemed to come home at the end. He always seemed to come home at the end. And she was referring to David's Psalms of Lament. It is true, lament is often a part of David's repertoire, but not all laments are created equal. Not all laments are created equal. Some laments are far better than others. And David's laments in the Psalter are better, not only because they are inspired, but because he always comes back home at the end. As I've argued before throughout the years, there is truly a biblical form of complaining. There is a sanctified complaining that is beholden to a Christian. But the difference in complainings or laments is whether you end up at home at the end or whether you get lost at sea. When complaining never leads to God's mercy, you have become a fool. When complaining never leads to God's mercy, you become bitter. You become a very difficult person to deal with. And as we have seen in Ecclesiastes 3, there is a season, there is a time for everything under the sun. There is a time to reflect on our labors under the sun. There is a time to consider our future under the sun. There is a time for enjoyment of leisure. There is a time to keep things. There is a time to throw them away. There is a time to laugh. There is a time to mourn. But as Solomon continues, there is a season, he says, there is a season to lament certain things. Solomon, in Ecclesiastes 3, in the beginning of chapter 4, he complains about justice, or the lack thereof. The universality of injustice, he says, is everywhere I look under the sun, there is injustice. It's present in that well-known refrain, children, that you may hear quite well in the playgrounds around the world. It's not fair. Why does he get this toy and I don't? But it also affects us too, adults. Why did he get that job promotion and I didn't? Why does she seem to have her household all together and I don't? Why does he have a boat and I don't? Why is life so peaceful for them and never for me? And we could compile here a list of unjust complaints. And you may have met people who believe that everyone, not a couple, but everyone is against them. Right? There's plenty of self-pity and plenty of self-victimization to go around the world 100 times. Laments can become beautiful prayers. Laments can become beautiful prayers. But if they never find their way home, they are painful to hear. So lament wisely, saints. Lament wisely. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon is functioning here very much in a very prophetic role, like Amos and like Jeremiah, and even as King David, who offered their laments before God. They cried for justice. Why did they cry for justice? Because justice is a deep longing of our hearts. How often have we felt like Solomon? Listen to his words. Moreover, I saw under the sun, and in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. Everywhere he looked, in the church, in the civil sphere, in the courts, everywhere he looked, injustice prevails. The rich scoundrels keep thriving. The godly, ethical Christian keeps getting demoted. Can you see this in our society? Can you see this perhaps even in our own lives? But Solomon is not complaining in vain. He is not complaining in vain in this composition. He views injustice apart from God, which is how he used to see the world. He views that kind of injustice apart from God as something that cannot be redeemed. The old Solomon looked everywhere, and everywhere where he sought for righteousness, he saw iniquity. He could not find a just judge. And now he offers us this psalmic lament. And the way to interpret Solomon's lament here is not as a kind of nihilistic treatise on life, no. Remember, he has established his premise for us in our passage. If you heard it this morning, well, you remember his premise. His premise is that life is fleeting. Life is vaporous. It appears for a little while, and then it disappears. But yet he writes that the children of God has a season for everything. The children of God must pace themselves. The children of God must redeem the time. Because God is the creator of time, and God gives time to his children freely. So that no one can honestly say, I don't have enough time. But all we can say, perhaps, is, I have not used my time wisely, or I have not prioritized my time as God would have me. Because God gives us a season for everything, a season to accomplish everything we must do. And Solomon's plea for justice here arises from his inability, as the old Solomon, he's reflecting on the old Solomon, it arises according to his inability to find meaning in his mismanagement of time, to find meaning in the mismanagement of time. And he's very straightforward about it. He's already said, there is a season for everything, and I wish I knew that there was a season for everything, because if I knew that there was a season for everything, I would have known that there is a season for God's justice to prevail over iniquity. And so Solomon tucks his lament right in the middle of this psalm of lament. He tucks within his lament a very deep sense of the justice of God, of the seasonality and the timing of God's justice. And the key element here is found there in verse 17. Remember, the best laments come home. But for Solomon, the lament for justice arrives right in the middle of his discourse here. Again, as I said, it's tucked at the center of this extended lament. But this central feature, this central theme, this central motif actually helps us interpret every question that Solomon asks. And here's where Solomon comes home in verse 17. But I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. That is the key that unlocks all of Solomon's questions. God shall judge, he said in his heart. He shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time, there is a season for everything, for every work. He has already informed us previously. He has told us that we need to be self-aware of our limitations as humans, that we are finite. We are not ubiquitous. We can't be everywhere at the same time. We are earthly bound, time-bound creatures. We are temporary creatures. But God has also placed eternity in our hearts. He has placed eternity in our hearts. And therefore, even though we are bound for a world to come, even though we are finite, limited in our understanding, in what we can see, we live constantly with this longing for justice, with this desire that justice would prevail on earth as it is in heaven, because we know that one day all our laments will be answered. One day everything will come home. The Lord of justice will vindicate us as a people. But for now, brothers and sisters, for now, we long for that justice. And therefore, it is a normal thing for you and I, it is a normal thing for us to offer our laments unto God, because we desire for things to be right and good and beautiful. But for now, justice does not arrive like an Amazon package with a text. For now, justice cannot be pre-ordered, which is why Solomon even compares our limitations, he says in the text. Our limitations are very much like the limitations of animals. And he compares our limitations to those of animals. Animals die, and therefore we die also. We all return to dust. We all return to dust. We come from dust, and to dust we shall return. This is Solomon echoing the words of the fall in Genesis chapter 3. And because of the fall, one might be tempted to think that we are all just dust in the wind, blowing in the wind. We might be tempted to think that death is inconsequential, or even perhaps, as some of our states in this country, that assisted suicide might not be a bad option after all. Is life just a big waste of energy? If our lives lack meaning. Perhaps our goal is to find other things that are meaningful. Perhaps if our lives lack meaning, if there is no true significance to who we are, if we are so indeed limited and injustice prevails everywhere, perhaps we should pour our meanings not only in our image-bearing status, but perhaps we should move our interests and we should pour our meaning to things like trees and whales. There's an entire block of American society that would love to do nothing more than to make the life of human beings disposable and the life of animals sacred, elevated beyond where God has placed them. I remember giving this invocation in D.C. last year, and in the middle of my invocation, I noticed there was a commotion in the audience, and a host of environmental lunatics stormed the venue where the event was taking place, screaming about the supposed atrocities of J.D. Vance's fracking policies. I mean, if Solomon's questions cannot be answered about justice, then what we do as a people is we create justice for other things. If our lives as human beings don't require justice, if there is no meaning in our own lives, then we are going to pour our affection on other things, on other created things, not on human beings, but on things that are created and that creep upon the earth. And so Solomon here raises a host of questions that come from those who are despairing of their own lives, for those who do find significance in their own lives. He's raising questions even about where do our spirits go when we die? Where do the spirits of animals go when they die? Who knows, he says, whether the spirits of the Son of Man go up and the spirits of animals go down to the earth. And at first glance, when we hear those words, it may appear that Solomon is going slightly insane, slightly crazy. But remember that laments must come home. And for Solomon, that lament has already come home in verse 17. Remember, he has already answered his own lament by affirming that God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, that there is a season for everything. Solomon is not raising questions that he can't answer. In fact, he's raising questions that now truly he can answer. He's asking questions that have troubled him and have troubled the human mind for a long, long time, but that now he has finally found the answers, because now he understands that human chronology has a telos. His heart is at peace now, which is why he can answer these questions without fear, without trepidation, without a troubled heart. It is God, he says, who judges the righteous. It is God, he says, who judges the wicked. It is God who brings the spirit of men to be tested on Judgment Day. It is God who shall come in glory to judge the living and the dead. It is God who works out all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Now, what is Solomon trying to do as he raises these questions? What is he trying to accomplish by raising these inquiries here? He's pointing us in many ways to the failure of autonomous thinking. The failure of autonomous thinking. The problem with autonomy is that we can ask every conceivable question that we can fathom about justice, and then at the end of that list of inquiries, we end up with a terrible lyrics like this. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Can you think of anything far more stupid than these lyrics? Imagine all the people living for today. If they live for today, then there is no true and ultimate justice, because autonomous thinking leads not only to terrible lyrics, but it leads to ultimate despair, brothers and sisters. Autonomous thinking offers no comfort. Autonomous thinking offers no ultimate satisfaction for the injustices of this world. If there is no heaven above us and only sky, then injustices are simply the mechanisms of a self-creating world with no purpose whatsoever. If injustice reigns, if there is no God above us to guide humanity to its proper end, then the tears of the oppressed, the purpose of labor, the purpose of life remain an ultimate mystery in a world that lacks true justice. If God does not judge the righteous and the wicked, then your tears will flow endlessly. Then the ground will continue to produce thorns and thistles forever. And it is better never to have existed than to have experienced this earthly pilgrimage. If God is not the judge of all the earth, then the oppressed will never find comfort or solace. But for Solomon, the lament must come home. As Doug Wilson writes, this knowledge of ultimate justice puts every judicial monstrosity in perspective. This knowledge that we share, that he shall come again in glory to judge the living, and that this knowledge of ultimate justice puts every judicial monstrosity in perspective. Every one of our laments, brothers and sisters, has an answer. And it is God's justice which works in his own time. It is God's justice which works for his own purpose. It is God's justice that works for his own glory. And we as Christians, we see an ultimate end where justice is answered. We see an ultimate end where illness and sickness and death and injustice and the mismanagement of justice is answered. But the ungodly man, Solomon says, will see confusion and chaos wherever they look. Every single atom of human existence is present with the stamped injustice of a world that has gone awry. For the ungodly, he will see seasons come and go, Sunday after Sunday, and always winter. Always the rule of the oppressor. Always the victim and never the victor. And here's Solomon's great exhortation when he compares humanity in despair to that of an animal. Solomon, his point is that if you forsake the God who judges all things and judges all peoples, then you are the one without understanding. Your pomp and your pride will make you no better than the animals. And instead of fulfilling your dominion mandate in Genesis 1, instead of having dominion over the animals, he says, you will be like unto them. Those who do not know God's justice will lament like beasts. They will groan and growl endlessly. They will complain and complain and complain, but their complaints will never come home to the one who can answer all their struggles and woes. And when we contemplate the justice of God, when we affirm wholeheartedly that he shall come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, that his justice will prevail. When we discuss God's justice, what we are doing ultimately is we are presenting to the world an argument for the justice of God and the end and extermination of evil in this world. And it's not the only argument to use against the extermination, the end of evil, but it is certainly a powerful argument indeed. Because for Solomon, the solution to the problem of injustice is that God shall judge the living and the dead, and that there's a season for everything. And the argument for justice is an argument for the eternality of men. Your souls are eternal. Your spirits will go up to the place of ultimate justice. And I know, as a minister, that many of you feel injustice by things that have occurred in your lives. I know that to be true. And I also know that you long to see restoration, renewal, a remedy for that thing. And God may operate that way while you live. It is true. He has done that many times, and he'll continue to do so, but maybe he will not. And however hard it is, Solomon instructs us that we need to rest with Solomon's perspective, that God will judge all things in his season, that all of our laments must come home to the righteous judge of all the earth. Now imagine this morning, imagine if at the instance of every human injustice that you face, that the triune God were to come down from heaven and carefully open heaven for you, opened the curtains of heaven, and at that moment of injustice that God would intervene with His justice and solve all your woes. Imagine if you never had to shed a tear for your oppression. Imagine if there was a time comforter for you at every corner. Imagine if a kind word quickly undid every wrong word spoken to you. All of these things we have felt, all of these things we have expressed, all of these things we have lamented upon, because these are the longings of a people who affirm and desire justice. If you don't believe in God's ultimate justice, then these are only meanderings rooted in hopelessness. But Christians grab a hold of justice. Christians desire justice. Christians confess loudly that He shall come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And Christians believe that whatever is bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, that God's justice will intervene more and more in our daily affairs as we submit to the living God. And so Solomon teaches us, yes, brothers and sisters, lament, lament, lament. Yes, brothers and sisters, cry out for justice. Compose your saddest songs imaginable. Pray for justice. We should fight, we should protest the injustices, the debauchery that takes place even in our own town. We can do all these things, but all our laments must ultimately come home in the end. We must acknowledge, as Solomon does, that God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, and then we must rest in that truth. That when our hearts are troubled, we must sing that truth. That when we are lost at sea, we must confess this truth, lament, but always return to hope. For there's a time for every purpose. There's a time for every work. But at the end, come home to Christ. In Him our labors are not in vain. In Him all our longings are fulfilled. But I said in my heart, Solomon says, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.